All right, we'll be starting in about a minute. Okay, and please sign into the attendance. Okay. All right, very good. Welcome back. Welcome back. Any questions before we get started? Anything on your minds? No? All right. Please rename yourself last name, comma, first. It's my daily reminder. I'd like to start by reviewing a few concepts from last class that gave students some confusion. I read it on the poll. It's not your fault. This topic is confusing. If you didn't quite get it, that's okay. It takes a little bit of time to set in. So again, we start with a basic terminology, which is an easement, right? An easement is a way of restricting land. An easement can be affirmative. For example, I'm allowed to cross onto Blackacre to, collect water. An easement could be negative in nature. That is, I am restricting how Blackacre can be used. In this class, at least, affirmative easements are going to be much more common. You won't see many negative easements. You may see them every now and then, but they're far less common. Okay, so you have affirmative easement and you have a negative easement. That's one way of dividing easements. Another way of dividing easements is between the phrases easement appurtenant or pertinent and an easement in gross. Okay, an easement appurtenant and an easement in gross. Okay, now the easiest way to distinguish the easement in gross from the easement appurtenant is who gets the benefit. With an easement in gross, the benefit belongs to a named specific person. Josh, Bill, Harry, Sally, whoever, right? If you have a conveyance and it says the benefit is for a person's name, then you're very likely dealing with an easement in gross. There may be some wrinkles, which are not very important now, but I think it's a good enough rule for your outline that if it names a person in the conveyance, you're dealing with an easement in gross. What does that mean? The person who's named has the benefit of the easement regardless of where they live, regardless of what property they own. So even if they sell Dryacre, which is the example we kept using, they would keep the benefit of the easement. Okay, that's the easement in gross. The other kind of easement that we talk about is easement appurtenant. All right, the easement appurtenant. And with the easement appurtenant, the benefit will belong not to a named person. Instead, the benefit belongs to the owner of a given piece of property. So the benefit is reserved for the owner of Blackacre, right? Or the owner of Dryacre. So whoever buys Blackacre can then come onto the other property to get water. The easement appurtenant, I think, makes some sense because it gives future successive owners the ability to live in a given area, right? If you're on Dryacre and there's no water and you negotiate for an easement, it makes sense that the easement will benefit whoever happens to live in Dryacre, right? If you move far away, why do you still need to come onto Wetacre to get water? So the easement appurtenant facilitates the transfer of property from A to B and B to C, that there's always going to be this ability to collect the water. Now, there's a term that you'll see, and we'll talk about it more today in next class, is run with the land. Run with the land. What that means is that the easement stays with the land, right? The easement appurtenant stays with the land. Whoever happens to own Blackacre at any given point in time can stand to benefit from the easement. With easements, don't worry too much about what it means to run with the land. It's actually more complicated with covenants, our next topic. Both an easement appurtenant, it's easy enough to say whoever owns Blackacre gets the benefit of the easement. I think that's the easiest way of describing it. Okay. So again, you can characterize easements in different ways. You can have a affirmative easement or a negative easement. You can have an easement engrossed or an easement appurtenant, right? So the same term can be divided up in different ways. And I know you're going to try and flowchart it. It's going to look messy. You can do it anyway. I can't stop you. But that's just the way that property law developed over the centuries. Okay, questions so far? Questions so far? Okay. All right. Two more pieces of terminology to review. And I want to do these as poll questions, and I'll call on people. So go to the class notes, please. And take a look at question number 1. It's going to be a short answer. And I want you to put your answers in, please. The first question: what is a dominant tenement? What is a dominant tenement, in your own words? And keep in mind that the phrase dominant tenement is the same thing as dominant estate. You'll see it different ways in different conveyances, but it's the same terminology. What is the dominant tenement? Okay, another 10 seconds. And whoever's next, just please raise your hand. Someone's got to raise their hand. I think, I think actually Jenny was next, so I think actually Lexi's might be up next, I think, if my memory serves. Lexis, you here?
Yes.
All right, help us out, please. What is the dominant tenement?
The dominant tenement is the land that's benefited.
Okay. Now, what type of easement will yield a dominant tenement?
An easement in gross.
Why?
Because an easement in gross is following the person and it's named, and a dominant estate is only a land, not a person.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Alexis. That's right. The dominant estate is the estate or the tenement that's being benefited. But you're only going to have an easement in gross. You're only going to have an easement in gross with a easement appurtenant. And the reason why is with an easement in... I said it wrong. You're only going to have a dominant tenement with an easement appurtenant because there's a estate that's benefiting. You are not going to have a dominant tenement with an easement appurtenant. Oh, that's a tongue twister. You're not going to have a dominant tenement with an easement. Oh, I did it wrong. I'm sorry. I flipped in my head, okay? With a dominant tenement, that's the estate that's being benefited. This is for real. You will only have a dominant tenement with an easement appurtenant. I think I said it right there. You're only going to have a dominant tenement with the easement appurtenant. You are not going to have a dominant tenement with an easement in gross. What I'm trying to convey to you is the terminology here is tricky, and even I just flipped it. So I apologize for that. But it will play games with your mind because tenement appertenant, and these words go crazy. Oh, by the way, if your Reef subscription renews, that's fine. Just try to take care of it before class because it doesn't always give you warnings in advance. So try to get that taken care of because we're right about the 2-week mark when the subscription runs out. Alrighty. Those Alexis. Okay, so now the next question, I want you to put this in your own words. What is a servient tenement? What is a servient tenement? I'm trying to use these poll questions as a way of basically approximating rule statements. It's not perfect, but making you type out a few words is more helpful to remember concepts than just picking A, B, C, or D. All right, and I think, Tim, you here? Okay, Tim, what is the servient tenement or the servient estate?
It's that's subject to the easement.
Oh man, what's going on? Your bandwidth? Okay, it sounds. Try that again.
Subject to easement.
I think I heard you. Subject to a burden. Is that what you said?
Subject to the easement.
Yeah, you sound like Darth Vader. I know it's not your fault, but it's very, very strange feedback. Okay, I think I heard what you said. I think you said subject to the burden, right? The servient estate is a state that's doing the serving. In our example, it's wet acre. It's providing the benefit, right? It's offering the benefit, or it's being burdened, depending how you look at it. Okay? All right, any questions on that so far? All right, let's try another question. Look at question number 3, and this is a two-parter. So let's look at question 3A. This is multiple choice. I give you a fact pattern. Adam, who owns wet acre and dry acre, conveys wet acre to Betsy, but Adam retains the right to use the land on wet acre. What is the servient estate? What is the servient estate? Okay, another 10 seconds. Okay, very good. Let's see. Giancarlo, you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, what's your answer here?
I put C,
Okay, why'd you put C?
serving tenement, because here it's providing the benefit.
Excellent. That's right. Good. The answer here is C, and at 80% of you got this one right, which I think is a very good number. Thank you, Giancarlo. Okay, let's try part 3B. Oh boy, I have to re-letter these because they became FGH. Thank you, Google. That's not what I want to do. That's not what I want to do. Google does this annoying thing where it always tries to change it to the continuing. Okay. All right, let's try question part 3B, please. Okay. Please put your answers in now. And I'll be calling on Jasmine in about 15 seconds. All right, 5 more seconds, and then Jasmine, you're up. All right, Jasmine, what's your answer here?
For this one, I put none of the above.
Okay, why'd you put none of the above?
Because it shows that there is no dominant estate since it's following a person. So
Well, hold on. Just what kind of easement do we have here, Jasmine? Is this an easement in gross or an easement appertenant?
Engrossed.
How do you know it's engrossed?
Because it's the land is following a person.
Very good.
It's not following just the owner.
Okay, very good. So with an easement engrossed, is there a dominant estate?
No, just a servient.
Okay, that's right. So the answer here is none of the above. And I that's very good, Jasmine. Thank you. I gave you those rule statements a minute ago quite deliberately, and it's one thing to write the rule statement in your note with an easement engrossed, there's no dominant estate, right? But when you actually see a question, you sort of glitch, right? You kind of wonder. So this one was only close. Only 55% got this one right, and about a third of you put D, which was dry acre. Now I want to just go through the choices, right? I framed this question in somewhat of a deliberately confusing fashion to try and trip you off, and it worked for a few people. When I'm asking about what's dominant and what's servient, I'm not asking for a person's name. I'm not asking about Adam or Betsy, right? So you can cross out A and B. Those are wrong off the bat. I'm asking for a piece of property. And what you need to remember is that when you have an easement engrossed that benefits a person is not an estate. Now that sounds obvious, right? But when I'm asking about an estate, I'm asking about a person's name. Right, so on the exam, don't tell me that Adam is the dominant estate or whatever it is. Right, that's not what I'm looking for. All right. Questions on number 4. I'm sorry, it's question 3. I didn't do it for questions number 3. Yes, Blake, go ahead, please, and then Elias is on deck.
So, looking at the fact pattern for 3, if that second sentence had said something along the lines of Adam maintained an easement and the deed on wet acre to be able to get to the water, that would change the answer to the dominant.
Say it again. You tweaked it a little bit. Just say how you tweaked it.
If Adam had maintained a right for whomever owns...
That's the magic word. Yeah, the magic word is for the right of the owner of. Right? You got to put the owner of wet acre or the owner of dry acre. I'm sorry. You have to put that right in the conveyance. That would transform it toward an easement appertenant, in which case you would have a dominant estate.
Which would be dry acre.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Very good. Good question. Elias, go ahead.
If this was an easement in appertenant.
No. Easement appertenant. It's not in appertenant. I know you want to say that. It's an easement engrossed and an easement appertenant. Just try to keep the terms straight.
Okay. This was an easement appertenant.
Good.
And would the question ever ask us who is the servient or dominant estate, or would it use the word tenement because there is no estate for I guess what I'm saying is, since estates can't be people, in a specific situation where there is a dominant.
Well, you would say that Adam has the dominant estate. He owns a dominant estate, right? That's the connection, right? A person can own the dominant estate, but he is not the dominant estate himself.
Okay.
It's like, remember King Louis? I am the state, right? No, you own the estate. You are not you're not the estate yourself. Make sense? Okay. A few other points to review that I wanted to clarify from last class that people were asking about. A license differs from an easement in that it can be revoked, generally. There's some exceptions, but generally you can revoke a license. It's not a permanent property interest. A license can be in writing. It doesn't have to be. It can be oral, right? A license does not need to comply with the statute of frauds. Right? If you have a license, it does not need to comply with the statute of frauds. One last point on licenses. If I give someone permission to cross Blackacre to go to the road, right, it's permissive, it's not hostile. You cannot gain what's called prescription through a license, right? If I am authorizing you to cross my property to go to the road, that's not adverse, that's not hostile. So very often when someone's using a license, they try to claim prescription later. and those claims will usually fail. This was in the Hallbrook case from Kentucky, where for more than a decade, the guy was allowed to use the road by permission. That is not enough to establish a claim to prescription. Okay, questions on that? Well, actually, you know what? Let's jump ahead. Let's do this question now for a minute. This is a short answer. Number 6. This one I think may be helpful for you for later. How does an easement by prescription... Oh, Alan, I'll get you in a second, I promise, after I do the poll. How does an easement by prescription differ from adverse possession? I want to just make sure you get your terminology straight here. See what you guys come up with this one. Okay. And I think next up is Nancy, I think you're next. So another 5 seconds.
Me?
Yes, go ahead. And I promise, Alan, I'll come to you right after with this.
W.
I just did V. I just did Jasmine a minute ago. You're next. A W is literally 2 V's. They're right next to each other.
Okay. So you want me to answer this question?
I would love for you to answer this question. Yes.
Okay, I'm guessing here. Is it that a prescription you only acquire the portion of the? Ooh, maybe it's that it's a prescription. Is it connected just to the person who's been?
Well, let's start basic, Nancy. What's what's adverse possession? Just mini review for a minute. What's adverse possession?
That's that open, notorious, uninterrupted, hostile, adverse use of property.
Okay, you're giving the elements, but
property.
When a person adversely possesses Blackacre, what happens? If I
now own it.
Okay, I own Blackacre, right? So if I squat on Blackacre for a decade, it's open and notorious, it's hostile, I have a claim of right. I own Blackacre, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would I obtain a prescriptive easement?
You have to use a part of it.
What do you mean use a part of it? I think you're on the right track. What do you mean use a part of it?
You use a portion of the land for the statutory.
What do you mean use? Just you're saying the word use. Just use a different word instead of use. Give me an example.
When you travel.
Travel. Okay, so if I walk across Blackacre for, let's say, a decade, right? Every day, walk across the land for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after a decade? Do I own Blackacre in fee simple?
No, you only have the right to use that path.
To travel. Just say travel instead of use.
Travel.
Okay. Okay, now we're closer. Okay, so try it again. What is prescription?
It is the right to travel the land.
And how do you get prescription? You're almost there.
By using it without permission for the statutory period.
Okay, good, very good. Okay, close enough. That's very close. Okay.
Okay.
Students always have difficulty with this concept, and don't feel bad. It's a sort of confusing idea. Adverse possession is when you basically are living or using the entirety of a property for the statutory period. And with adverse possession, if you're successful at the end of the process, you get a fee simple, right? You own Blackacre in fee simple. Prescription is different. Prescription, it's not like medicine from the pharmacy, right? But it's the same word. A prescription is when you use the property in a limited fashion. So Nancy had the example of traveling. That's a good example. If I travel across Blackacre every day for a decade, I will not own Blackacre in fee simple. I wasn't using it continuously. I was just traveling across it. But you actually gain an easement across Blackacre. And that's a permanent property interest, which you now hold. And if someone else buys Blackacre, they're going to be subject to the same easement that you had, right? We call this easement by prescription. right? Easement by prescription, or you'll see also a prescriptive easement. You'll see it both ways in the book. An easement by prescription or a prescriptive easement, right? That is now a stick in the bundle. You own that. That's your property right. It's yours, right? You earned it. The easement by prescription cannot be revoked. If the property owner puts up a fence, you can sue him to block the fence. All right, Alan, you've been patiently waiting. I'm sorry to keep you waiting for so long. It was just at the cusp of the poll question. I didn't want to interrupt it. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, okay. So my question was, with a license, say that the person that was granted the licensee, say that they go beyond the scope of
good question.
What the licensor had gave them. Could that then turn into a prescriptive easement because it would be considered adverse, or
excellent?
Will the court still look at it as a license?
No, that's such a good question, right? So let's say, I'll give you an easy example, right, Alan? Let's say you give someone permission to ride a bicycle across your road, right? That's permission. You can ride your bicycle, because a bicycle it's not noisy, there's no engine, you don't make a mess. Okay, then the guy starts riding his car on your road. All right, and he does that for a decade, and you've never given permission to drive a car. He would have actually acquired an easement by prescription to drive. The license was for for a bicycle, but he used a car. So if you exceed the scope of the license and the owner doesn't take any steps to remedy that, at that point you're left with prescription. You can actually gain an easement that way. Right, but you're pushing your luck, because if the guy tells you to ride your bike and you're using a car, he can just kick you off and build a fence, and that's fine. So you're pushing your luck if you try that. Chance, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Alan, does that make sense?
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, good. Chance, go ahead, please.
With the prescriptive easement, there could not be express or implied permission. Could you then argue that same point and go, well, I already gave him permission via the bike. By not saying anything to him about the car, I'm giving him implied permission to use that as well, and then therefore it's not adverse?
So I think I missed you in the middle. I'm sorry. Say it one more time.
You have to. It has to be adverse for it to be a prescriptive easement.
Right.
But if you imply permission, so in Alan's hypo, where he said, okay, well, he already had permission to ride the bike.
Yeah, no, I get it. I don't think you can imply permission. I think if you get permission to ride a bike, you have permission to ride a bike. You can't elaborate upon that yourself. It's a very narrow thing. Let's say you invite a plumber into your house to fix your bathroom. That doesn't mean he can go fix the kitchen, the sink in the kitchen, right? He's for a very specific purpose, right? You invite someone on. It's like an invitee from torts. I'm sure you remember that concept. It's for a specific purpose. That makes sense, Chance?
Yeah, there was one thing about that, but no big deal. I can touch that. I can email you later.
Okay, that's fine. Blake, go ahead.
So we've been talking about adverse and prescriptive easements.
Right.
They require open and notorious possible use, correct?
The elements are the same. Whatever they are for adverse possession, they're going to be the same for prescription. Just the continuous elements tweak because you're not using the entire property, just sort of walking.
Right, and we talked about Rockefeller Center.
That's right, yeah.
But if Rockefeller Center, for example, grants the ability to access their land, to walk through that land, it's permission that's granted. Can the New Yorker that walks through it every single day be doing that in a hostile fashion since permission's been granted? Right.
Okay. So everyone understand the hypo Blake raised is about 30. The Rockefeller Center is a huge outdoor plaza in New York City, and every year, usually in July, they shut it down for a Sunday, so people can't claim continuous. Blake's question, which I think is a good one, is if Rockefeller Center is permitting people to walk across their property, how can anyone claim adversity? I think that's your question.
Yes.
Okay, I think the short answer is they're not able to block people because of the city's rules, right? In other words, because of the unique nature of what 30 Rock is, I don't think they'd be allowed to deny people entry. So what they could do is put up a sign saying, "You are welcome to walk across this property," to make it really clear that this is because they're choosing to and not because the law is requiring them to. Sometimes you'll see this by a beachfront property where someone says, "We welcome." It's framed very. It's like guests are allowed to cross this property between 9 and 5 p.m. Right, so it's giving a very specific permission, and that's designed to kill any adverse possession claims or prescription claims.
I mean, that same concept could apply to somebody on the corner lot where the same student through middle school, high school, or elementary school walks across that piece of land.
Yeah, it's risky. I mean, it in some ways it's better to give permission than to deny it, because if you deny permission, they may try to claim prescription on you.
Okay.
Which is why New York Rockefeller Center says, let's just not avoid these sort of very difficult line judgment issues. Let's have a clear, unequivocal asking, no, you did not cross on Sunday, July 13th, because, that's my dad's birthday, right? Because it was closed. It was all closed to the public. So that's an objective factor you can show. That makes sense? Okay. All right. So let's move on to today's topic. Last class we talked about easement by prescription, right? If you can get an easement by prescription, good for you, because you now have a permanent stick in the bundle, right? You did it for 10 years. Go, go, go. What happens if you couldn't get 10 years, right? Let's say you got 9 years and 11 months, and the owner finally said, screw this, I'm kicking you off. And you're short of 10 years. You're 9 years, 11 months. Like, you almost made it. You were like at the promised land. You were just at the border, and then you got knocked out. You may have other options. The courts recognize something called a quasi-easement. A quasi-easement. Okay, take a look at question number 4, please. And I'd like for you all to give me a short answer. What is a quasi-easement? A quasi-easement. Q-U-A-S-I. Such a funny word. Quasimodo, right? A quasi-easement. Okay. And I think Jordan says she's not going to be here today. I think Megan, you're next.
Yes.
Okay, another 5 seconds, gives everyone a chance to type in. And in case the building is opening up at noon, not that anyone here actually cares. It's a weird thing. In the past, when classes were canceled, it was such a pain in the neck to reschedule. It was awful. When we had Harvey, I think I had weekend classes for 2 months to catch up, because I had to cancel like 5 or 6 classes in 2017. But now it's like, whatever, we just go on Zoom. I guess there's some perks. Okie doke. All right, Megan, what's your answer? How would you characterize, or how would you describe a quasi-easement?
So I put that it's when one owner has 2 pieces of land and he uses one portion of one land to benefit the other.
Why is it a quasi-easement? Why is that just not an easement?
Because he owns the dominant and the servient.
Well, if a person owns both the dominant and the servient, how do you have an easement against yourself? Can that's actually a good point. Megan, can you have an easement against yourself? Does that make any sense? No. I didn't want to answer this by because you raised it. Jordan, what happens if a person acquires with the dominant and the servient tenement? What happens to the easement?
Does it nullify?
It's extinguished. Yeah, we'll get to this later. I didn't want to get to it now, but you raised the issue. If the same person owns both the dominant and the servient tenement, the easement's extinguished, right? You have the full bundle of sticks. There's no more dominant and servient, so it actually would kill the easement. Okay, so Megan, that's not quite right, but you gave me another point, which is exactly right. So I'm glad you did that just there. John, you here?
Yes, sir.
All right, John, help us out here. What'd you put? What's a quasi-easement?
So, it's an easement created under specific circumstances. You've been doing something for a long time, but you don't quite meet the requirements for prescription.
Good.
In the end, the court decides what's going to happen, who gets to use it. Yeah.
So, who's deciding, John, whether the quasi-easement exists? So who's making that decision?
The court.
The court. And what do we call it when the court creates a right that's not written down? There's no written easement. There's no statute of frauds. What do we call that when the court suggests something exists that's not really in writing? What's that phrase? You see it all the time.
Is that equity?
No, it's in the ballpark. It begins with an I.
Oh, man. Implied?
That's it. Good. Very good. What's implied mean? You got it. You thought you were done. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. No.
What's implied mean?
Implied is so.
What's the opposite of implied? Try that one. What's the opposite of implied?
Expressed.
Good. Okay. What's express mean?
So you've got it's in writing.
Okay. Good. It complies with what? An express conveyance complies with blank. Yeah, you're right.
The statute of frauds?
That's it, yeah. And express writing would comply with the statute of frauds because it's signed by all the parties, right, John? But what if you don't have an express writing? What can the court do in that case?
You have an oral statement?
No. You have no agreement at all. There's no writing, there's nothing. What can the court do in that case? Okay, Cam, you here?
Yes, I'm here.
So Cam, what happens if you don't have an oral, you don't have an express statement? What can the court do in that case?
Kind of look at the situation to see whether or not it's been regularly used prior.
So give me an example, right? Let's say we have wet acre and dry acre, our hypothetical we keep using. What might a quasi easement look like in that case?
Where somebody they had used it for an extended period of time, or use it as an access point for an extended period of time.
Now, why would that not be prescription? Or why might it not be prescription?
It might not be the same spot. It might not be something that specific. They might not be accessing for the same reason every time.
Good. So you're saying they don't meet the requirements of prescription, but the court can blank the easement. Like, what's that word? I think John said it. Imply. Okay, good. And what does it mean to imply an easement?
It means to assume that it exists.
Well, I like that. Assume that it exists. Just expand upon that a bit more. I think you're on the right track. What does that mean? Assume that it exists.
They can, by people's actions, the owner and the person using it, they can infer that.
Sorry. Imply and infer are not the same thing. This is actually from Justice Scalia's biggest grievances with the English language. Imply is correct, right? I imply, you infer. It's a two-way, so they're not the same. This is a common error. Justice Scalia, he loved dictionaries, but he hated Webster's Third Dictionary. If you're in my comma class, you'll know why. He hated Webster's Third Dictionary because it said that imply and infer the same meaning, which it doesn't. Anyway, so imply is the right word. I didn't mean to pick on you, but it's a pet peeve. All right. So the court assumes the existence. All right, thanks, Ken. That's good. When you talk about an implied easement, the court's saying, look, we know you don't actually have a written easement. There's nothing express. And we know that you don't have a claim to prescription. You haven't done it for 10 years with all the requirements. But the court can pretend you have an easement. All right? So the quasi-easement is the court bases the easement on prior usage. Right? On prior usage. right? How has it been used in the past, right? That's what a quasi-easement is. Quasi means like almost, kind of, sort of, right? You'll see this word in property, like quasi-service, a process, and, this word comes up. It's almost like constructive. You'll see that word also, right? It's sort of like constructive. It is kind of, but not really. Okay. All right, so the quasi-easement is where it's based on some past usage. But keep in mind, it's not prescription because you don't meet the requirements. If you can meet the requirements of prescription, go for it. That's much better because it's not based on the judge's sense of what's fair or not, right? It's an actual statutory limitation, and you can prove it with some specificity. The quasi-easement is, someone said equity a minute ago. He goes, John, the quasi-easement is sort of equitable. It's sort of based on fairness, and it doesn't meet the strict requirements of the law, but it's in the ballpark. It's close enough. All right. Any questions on the quasi-easement? Okay. Chase, you here? Well, actually, let me do a poll question and call you Chase in a minute. So let's try question number 5. What is an easement by necessity? And just take a minute, and I'll call you Chase soon. All right, another 10 seconds. All right, Chase, what's your answer here?
I guess it's an easement that's granted when the circumstances require it.
All right, so just be clear, who's granting the easement? Is this an easement between the parties, between the owner of Wet Acre and Dry Acre? Who's granting the easement?
It's not explicit because you have to use.
Right, so there's no express easement. So who's creating this easement in this case? It's not who?
Courts.
Exactly. The court is implying the easement, right? The court's going to imply the easement. And Chase, what circumstances, or in what circumstances does the court imply an easement by necessity?
It's usually when you have no access to your own land, it's like the cost another person's land.
Right. Do you remember? There are different types of necessity, right? In Texas, at least, this is in our first case in a minute. How necessary does something have to be to get an easement by necessity in Texas? What's that standard?
It has to be more than just convenient.
But what's that phrase, though? How necessary does that have to be? What's that phrase we use in Texas?
I'm not sure I remember.
Elias? What's the phrase, Elias, we have to have? What kind of necessity do you need?
Reasonable necessity?
No. That's not right. In Texas, what's the standard? It's not reasonable necessity.
I think necessity of alternatives.
Corey, you here? Corey? Troy, back up top. No Troy. Anthony?
Professor?
Yeah.
You skipped me.
Who did I skip? Oh, Nikki. Oh, Nicole, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, Nicole. Go ahead. What's the answer?
It's strict necessity.
Okay, thank you so much. And you got the answer right. I'm sorry. I went from John to Cam. I apologize. That was not deliberate. That's right. Strict necessity. That's right. What's strict necessity, Nikki?
Strict necessity means that it has to be urgent and there has to be no reasonable alternative.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you so much. Strict necessity is a very hard standard to satisfy, right? You need to show that it's absolutely essential, right? That without this easement, you cannot live, right? You're going to be landlocked, right? You're going to have, no water, right? You got to really be in tough position. It's hard to get. And the reason why Texas, I think, adopts such a stringent standard is the courts say, you know what? If this is so important to you, pay for it, right? If this easement is so important to you, then pay your neighbor to let you cross. Everyone has a price, and just figure out what that price is and pay it. The court is not going to intervene and interfere with that relationship, right? If there's a way that you can work this out amicably, you should work out amicably. You should not go to court to get something that the free market can provide. At least Texas and other states have this very stringent standard. I think Elias said reasonableness, which is this sort of wishy standard. That's the standard, I think, in most states, right? It's not this stringent necessity. But the court asks, is this a reasonable thing to do? And I think that would be what sort of the more pushover standard is. But at least in Texas, it's push, push, push. Yeah, Ashley, go ahead.
Did you say that reasonable was majority?
I haven't done a survey, but I think hold on, let me check my notes. I hope I didn't misspeak. Whenever I say majority, people... yeah, I think majority is going to be the more of a reasonable standard. Hold on. No, did I flip it?
Page 793, number 2.
Yeah. They say
still dominant view reflected by alpha.
Yeah, you know what they say some jurisdictions is strict and minority is the reasonable necessity. Yeah, I guess. All right, I'll go with that. It's just a some. There may not be a strict majority rule here, but I think the trend, as we say, is more towards being more permissive. That makes sense, because the strict necessity standard is pretty unforgiving. But I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but thank you for pointing that. I think, yes, that's some jurisdictions. It's always tricky. I think the book hedges in some places. You ever notice that where they're not sure because it's not always clear what a state adopts. So I would say the trend is moving towards reasonableness, but what do I know? I don't know anything. Okay, thank you for that, Ashley. I think I heard the voice of chance coming out. All right, questions on that one? All right, let's start on page 793. I want to go through that that diagram with like the 5 grids in a bit. Now, is Corey here? I don't think I saw his name. No. All right, Troy is not here, but Anthony is here, right?
Yes, I am.
All right, Anthony, just hang tight. I'll call on you in a minute, please. All right. So take a look again on this diagram on page 793 to 794. It's figure 10.4. And I think this is a good example to illustrate the concept of a quasi-easement or an easement by necessity. All right. So we have this situation where we have lots numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you have lot number 5 in the middle. Right, and as you can imagine, lot number 5 is in a very difficult place because the owner of lot 5 has no access to the road. He's landlocked. And we presume, right, that a person will not knowingly landlock himself. Right, we just presume that. Why? Maybe it's a bad assumption, but people aren't stupid, right? They're not going to deliberately trap themselves on Blackacre. They're not going to do it. So what happens here, right? Let's say a person A owns all 5 lots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If a person owns all 5 lots, they don't have to worry about landlocking themselves. right? Because they can just cross over their own land. I know this is going to sound obvious, but I think it's an important point. You can't trespass upon yourself, right? It's like, duh, of course not, right? But it's actually an important point of law. A person cannot trespass on themselves. It's not possible, right? You can't intrude on your own interest in property. So long as a person owns lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's no difficulty here. But then the facts tell us that A died intestate without a will. And he had 5 children. Okay? So it turns out that lot number 1 goes to B. Lot number 2 goes to C. Lot number 3 goes to D. Lot number 4 goes to E. And lot 5 goes to F. And as we say, the owner of lot 5 is effed, right? He's in trouble. He can't get out. So then the law does something sort of funny, right? We sort of do this revisionist game where we say, well, originally when A purchased lots 1 through 5, he would not have wanted to landlock himself. So let's think of it this way. When A purchases lots 1, 2, 3, and 4 from O, there's really no problem. But when A purchased lot number 5 from O, there was basically an easement that was reserved, right, to cross from 5 to 4. But by owning all 5 of those lots, that easement basically gets extinguished. This was a point that, I can't remember who said it, but someone said a few minutes ago. When you own all 5 lots, any sort of easement becomes extinguished. There would have been an easement as when O owned lot 5, but as soon as O sold lot 5 to A, that easement was extinguished. So in this case, the way to create the easement is not based on implied prior use. You would create the easement by the necessity doctrine because it's impossible to go anywhere, right? So the owner of F will be able to claim an easement by necessity, right? Again, but I want you to see these 2 points. Originally, when O owned lot 5 by itself, we presume that O reserved an easement for himself to go across lot 5 onto lot 4 onto the road. But when A purchased lot 5, that easement was extinguished. That easement was gone. So the only way the owner of lot F can cross is with an easement by necessity. And I think in this case, this would be a good case for an easement by necessity. Okay. Question on that example. No? All right, Tony, I never actually called on you, I'm sorry. But I'll call on you now. You want to give me the facts, please, in the second case, Othen versus Rosier? Rosier, I'm not sure how you say it.
Sure. So...
Oh, roster. I'm sorry. Yeah, Othen, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. So it was all owned by Hill, essentially, and then at different points in time, he either sold or divested different portions of the land to the different individuals. And Rosier ended up owning a 100-acre lot and then a 16.31-acre lot. And then Othen was the other guy, and he basically owned a 60-acre lot and then a 53-acre lot. And so Othen was claiming an easement across the west side of Rosier's 100 acres, so that way he could get to the highway that was running north and south. And that was pretty much the only way he could get from his portion of land to that highway. And so what he was trying to do was basically the land started to get kind of broken up, and Rawson was worried that through the use of the waterways and the way they were turning out, they were messing up his road and that he wouldn't be able to use that portion of his land to keep doing what he was doing. So he created a levee, and in doing so, it blocked off that easement that Othen claimed he had. And so Othen sued to make the court provide an injunction for him to have that levee and then ensure that he can continue the use of that easement he thought he had.
Okay, good. So Tony, let me just ask you a question as a start. Could there have been a claim here by Othen for prescription?
I want to say no.
Okay, let me just pause you for a second. In any case involving easements, where there's some sort of implied easement, always ask yourself first, is there a claim for prescription? It's a very easy way for me to test you on multiple topics with one question.
Right.
Because in almost any case with an easement, you might claim prescription. So in this case, you think there's a claim for prescription?
I don't think so.
Okay, I think that's right. Tell me why.
Because he wasn't like.
What was lacking? What was not present that you would need to get a prescriptive easement?
I'm guessing like an open hostility-ness?
That's right. Was this permissive or was this with hostility?
I think at the time he knew Othen was using it, so he was just kind of like, yeah, go ahead, man. I know you have to get there.
It's permissive. Yeah, so there's no claim for prescription, right? Right, Anthony?
Right.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so that's the first thing to think about here. There's no claim for prescription. So since there's no claim for prescription, you would need to have an implied easement. An implied easement could be either a quasi-easement based on past use, or an easement by necessity. Right? So let me show you some diagrams which the publishers of the book give me. I hate screen sharing, but I'll do it just briefly. Okay. So here's the sequence of events, and these diagrams are better than the ones in your book. So originally you have this huge property called the Tone Survey, which is just this huge 2,500 acre lot. Okay, so at one point, we'll just make this easier, Rosier purchases a 100 acre lot that is right next to the road. Okay. Later, Othen purchases a 60 acre lot that's not across the road, right? It's not touching the road. Now, for Othen to get to the road, he's going to have to walk along the grass, walk along the green. And by all accounts, he was permitted to do that. There's permission. Okay. Then there's a third transaction. Othen purchases this 53 acre lot. So he owns 60 down here and 50 up here. About 103 acres. 113 acres. Still, he's able to get to the main road by going north or south. At that point, Rosier buys another 16 acres, which partially blocks Othen's access, but he can still get to the road north or south. For many years, we learned that Othen used the roadway that went across Rosier's property as permissive. Okay, but eventually he blocked it off. Okay. So, Haley, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
So, Haley, is there a case for strict necessity here?
No.
Okay, tell me why not.
Because there's a reasonable alternative that he could have gone around.
Right, what's the reasonable alternative?
Walking through the grass.
Yeah. Or what else could he have done if he wasn't allowed to walk in the grass? In other words, if he really needed to go across someone's property, what could he have done?
I'm not sure.
Well, if you want an easement, if you want permission to cross someone's property, what might you offer them?
Oh, you could offer to pay them.
Yeah, pay them, right? But he went to court. So the court here says there's no claim for a strict necessity, right? An easement by necessity.
Right.
What about a quasi-easement?
The
Did the court talk about that at all?
quasi-easement, I don't remember them talking about a
No, they didn't.
quasi-easement,
Did they? You're right.
but I could be wrong.
No, you're exactly right. Thank you for that, Haley. The court does talk about prescription briefly, and the court does talk about an easement by necessity, but it doesn't really talk about the quasi-easement. And I think this case illustrates a point that when you have these sort of equitable cases, right, which are based on sort of fairness considerations, the courts don't have any sort of strict protocol to apply. So the court may have just assumed that the easement by necessity and the quasi-easement are one and the same, right? That in order to show that you have a quasi-easement, you have to show necessity. So there's not going to be a rigid, predictable test to decide what a quasi-easement is. In fact, in this case, I don't think they mention it. But here, I think the court basically says, as a matter of fairness, we don't need to intervene. This is something that Othen can figure out himself. He doesn't need the courts to create the easement for him. All right. So questions on the Othen case, right? There's no easement by necessity. It's not strictly necessary. There are ways around this. You go up or down, north or south. Okay, questions on Othen? No? Okay. All right, let's go on to the next case. The next case involves beaches. If you notice, the pages jumped around. This case, the New Jersey case, used to be right after the Texas case. And I thought it made sense there, but your beloved casebook editors rearranged the entire book a couple years ago. And they put the beach case much earlier in the book, which I know why they did it. I don't teach other topics, and now it jumps around. Some basic facts first. There's a concept in property law called the public trust. The public trust. And the public trust suggests that there's some there's some things in the world that are so important that they can't be owned by an individual. And I think every state and probably every country in the world agrees that the water, the open seas, are part of the public trust. There might be certain restrictions when you get closer to a shore, but the open oceans are considered public trusts. The state also considers a public trust the shore. That is where the water meets land. Now, I know this is going to sound really stupid, but it actually makes a difference. The place where water meets land is called a beach. I know that sounds really stupid, but this is important, right? But a beach is not fixed, right? Because of tide, right? What's tide? The water moves closer and further away from the shore. It's because of the pull of the moon. That's why we have waves, not very important for here. Right? So sometimes the water may be very close to the property, and sometimes the water pulls out. You have high tide and you have low tide. Okay? When you have water coming back and forth, you can't really have any structures there unless it's on stilts or something like in Galveston, because the water is always coming back and forth. It's also hard to have vegetation because salt water kills plants. So you have instead sand, right? There's different kinds of sand. There's what's called the wet sand and dry sand. Wet sand is the sand where usually the water comes onto. And the dry sand is where the water usually doesn't come onto, though it may once in a while. So you have the water. If you look at the screen here, let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay? You have the water. You have the wet sand, right, over here. You have the kind of wet sand over here. You have the dry sand over here. Then you have vegetation. You have plants, you have trees, you have grass, you have whatever else you have. These different zones actually matter quite a bit. because the water and the wet sand is usually considered public trust. It's part for the public. In most states, the dry sand can be owned by private property. And the vegetation area is definitely public property. But how do you get to the water? Right? This is the rub. How do you get to the water? In order to get to the water, you need what's called vertical access. To come from the main road, which is public, down into the water, which requires you walking across the vegetation line, across the dry sand, across the wet sand, and going to the sea. Okay? In virtually every state, the government requires what's called vertical access, which means you cross the vertical strip on the dry sand to the wet sand. All right, everyone with me get the difference. I know it sounds stupid, but there's a big difference between the dry sand, the vegetation line, and the wet sand. These are important concepts, right? Where the vegetation is, that's your private property. No one's coming into your backyard. Where your dry sand is, you have to let people cross. They're not allowed to stay there, right? They can't just pitch a tent and start living on your dry sand, but they're allowed to cross. And once they get to the wet sand, it's open to the public. They can walk up and down. They can sit on the water, whatever else. The case we have today from New Jersey concerns the dry sand, right? You had a beach club. It was a private beach club, although it had somewhat of a quasi-governmental capacity. It wasn't really clear about this. But there was a beach club that limited the dry sand access to members. The wet sand was to the public. You could always go there, right? So you could walk along the wet sand, but you couldn't stay in the dry sand. And there was a lawsuit filed by some members of the community in New Jersey arguing that the dry sand should be allowed to be open to the public. Now, keep in mind that there were plenty of public beaches. There were beaches, a few blocks away, but this is New Jersey. And we know what New Jersey does. They like to reverse the common law. That's just, they wake up in the morning, think, you know what? Feudalism, we don't like those shackles. Let's throw them off. And that's how those courts work. So the issue in this case is whether the dry sand area should be subject to the public trust. Okay. Dylan, you here?
Present.
Okay, Dylan. What does the court hold here in the New Jersey case?
The court held that the dry sand area should be subject to public trust.
How come?
Sorry, I left my, I didn't take the best notes over this, and I left my pages in the library.
Okay. Marissa? You here, Marissa? I'm going to check attendance later because I didn't see this when people were absent. Cassidy?
I'm here.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
What did the court hold here?
They held that the area that was owned by the private beach club should be able to be accessed by the public because of the public use doctrine or the public trust doctrine.
Good.
Sorry, my voice is messed up.
That's okay. Why, though? Why did the court feel the need to make this public sand part of the public trust, the dry sand? They were allowed to walk across it, right? There's no dispute about that, but they were allowed to stay there, to tan and do whatever it is you do in New Jersey.
It had to do with did it have to do with the fact that everyone was allowed, that the membership to the club was available to public use?
Right, but why do you need to stay in the dry sand? Why can't you just walk there, go to the wet sand, then go home? Why do you need to be able to, sit in the sand?
Because everyone needs to be able to enjoy use of the coastal area.
Right, so it's not just the water, it's the sand also, right?
Yeah, you need to be able to fish and sunbathe and.
It's tanning. I'm only being slightly facetious.
Is that really it?
Yeah, no, that's basically it. Yeah, it's because you can cross it, right? So this is a question of whether you can.
Then.
Yeah, it says sunbathing. That's where they're using the cases, right? Sunbathing, which means tanning, right? So
well, that's very important in New Jersey.
it's a Jersey thing. You wouldn't understand. I'm from Staten Island, which is basically New Jersey. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. When I was a kid, I used to go to New Jersey beaches. I never understood why things were the way they were. But you basically pay a $5 fee, and you're basically a member for a day. Like that's how it works. You pay this small fee, and you're allowed onto the beaches. I never quite understood it, but now it is. That's right, Chance. GTL. Okay. The Jersey Shore reference though is fading. The show's been off the air. I guess I have a new season, but it was much more popular in 2012, and now it's sort of just petered out. It's faded. All right, but the court holds that to access the sea, it's not just your vertical access; you also have to have the horizontal access to stay in the sand, which is basically to tan. I mean, I don't really know what else you need to do there. I don't know, play volleyball.
Recreate.
What's that?
Just recreate.
Yeah, recreate. Okay, that's good. Okay, well, thank you, Cassidy. So that was the holding in that case. But one important point about the beaches is that there's teacher time. One of the important point about the beaches is you have. Okay, you're gonna make me do this. I was actually a huge Jersey Shore fan. Ginormous. I was actually at each of the Jersey Shore film locations around the world. All of them. I went to the Shore House in Jersey. I went to the house in Miami. And I went to Florence, Italy, and I visited where they worked and lived. So don't even. Yes, you're welcome. The Jersey Shore cast is basically the people I grew up with. It was very close to home. In fact, I think 2 of them were from Staten Island, if memory serves. So there you go. Exposed. I gave a Jersey Shore fact pattern a couple years ago, but I found the reference is just fading because people don't watch it as much. It just hasn't as much salience. So I have to put a time limit on my pop culture references because things just people don't pay attention. All right. Anyway, back to law. The issue with the beach cases, though, is it's not prescription. Because the law actually requires the vertical access, right? And when the law requires that access, you don't have the requirements to build hostility. In some jurisdictions, people actually put up signs saying people are permitted to cross from 9 till 5, to try to head off or try to cancel any possible prescription claims. But basically, in New Jersey, if you have a beachfront property, you can't keep people off. Right, you have to make the membership open to the public. Snooki and Vinny can come whenever they need to. All right. Sorry. Okay. All right. Any questions in the beach case? All right. Let me try to. Oh yeah, Krista, go ahead. If it's about Jersey Shore, I'll have to take an office hours.
No, I never watched that.
Good for you. You're good for it.
So this is New Jersey, so this is a reversal of common law?
That's right.
So Texas would not be the same?
I don't think so. Although Texas has this sort of very... what's it called? There's a phrase, it's like from time immemorial. It's just very, what is it? In Texas, the phrase is a use that has existed so long that the memory of men runneth not to the contrary. It's such a weird phrase. What it means is, in Texas, forever and ever and ever, you've had access to the beach, and that's the basis. But that gives you the vertical access. It doesn't give you the horizontal access. That's the key distinction. Make sense, Carissa?
I think so. So basically, you still have the walk-in, but
you always have the walk-in, right, to go from the street to the beach. Right.
But you could have houses that go all the way down to the tide in Texas.
Yes.
That reach all the way to the tide.
What you'll usually see, Carissa, is between houses is like a narrow passageway, and you can walk between fences. If you ever go to Galveston, you'll see that sometimes. So basically, people know this is there, and they build these fences right between the properties, so you can kind of just walk straight through. That's usually how it's done, right? You don't want people walking through your backyard, so you kind of make a path. You don't have to have the exact path you want, just you have to have some vertical access to the water. Nancy, go ahead. And I'm going to start the minute poll because we're almost out of time, but you can go ahead, Nancy.
So when is horizontal required? Horizontal
In New Jersey.
So only New Jersey. That's where it was the dry sand horizontally. They had to do it.
I don't know only. I never like saying only. I know the New Jersey case is somewhat unique because the court holds that you not only have the right to horizontal access, but the membership of the club is open to the public. I think that's a unique New Jersey rule, right? Usually you can walk. There might be some jurisdictions where you can walk across the sand, but actually stay there and sunbathe and do whatever you do in New Jersey. I think that's a unique Jersey thing. Okay.
So when in the first case, when the guy's using the road to get to his land, that's vertical access.
Well, just be careful. These concepts of vertical and horizontal really only applies in beach cases. I wouldn't extend it to regular prescription cases. This is a unique thing because of the public trust. The public has a right to access the water, and there's usually only one way to get there, which is over land.
Okay, that's what was confusing me. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. All right, let me try to summarize and wrap up and let you guys out of here. Oh, by the way, no class on Monday if you're celebrating Yom Kippur. Have a meaningful fast. So I won't see you until next week. But let me summarize a bit and I'll let you guys out of here. We have this category called implied easements. Implied, again, means the court's creating it. It was not created expressly by the parties. And we have these two kinds of implied easements. It's always two of everything. It's like Noah's Ark, right? We have these two types of implied easements. The first is called a quasi-easement, which is sort of this very vague concept where the court implies an easement based on prior usage. There's no strict rules here. It's sort of like an equity estoppel type argument. It's like a fairness, reliance interest. There's not a strict rule about what it means. The second one has a little bit more teeth, which is called the easement by necessity. Excuse me, with the easement by necessity, you do have a standard which is either reasonably necessary or here in Texas, strictly necessary, where the courts will create an easement by necessity if it's absolutely necessary. Okay? But yeah, I know that I know that these rules are confusing. I think the book says that the strict necessity standard is majority. We'll go with that one. I think that's probably good enough. I'll tell you. I'll probably tell you an exam which jurisdiction, so you're not going to be required to guess. But what I usually do is say you're in Texas, and that's my way of telling you a strict necessity standard. That's how I test you on it. I'm not that creative, so that's probably where you would go with it. Okay. Anything else? All right. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you on Wednesday next week.